Welcome to Wasatch Weekends. For this Monday, November 13th edition, I'm your host, Ben Roof. On today's show, we've got some advice on how to avoid getting sick this cold and flu season. We've also got Killing the Image, a new film focusing on the story of Olympic gold medalist and five-time world champion boxer Andre Ward. And then we've also got pop artist Devon showing us their work and telling us all about what it means to be a pop artist. But before we get started with the show, I hope you're as ready as I am for ski season because it starts this coming weekend. With Friday being the opening day for Alta, Bryan Head, Park City Mountain, and Solitude, with Woodward opening up on Saturday, the 18th, following all of the ski hills. Now, let's take a look at the weather and see if the week is going to cooperate with us for opening weekend.
This weather report is brought to you by Sun and Ski Sports, your new mountain sports headquarters.
Welcome back to Wasatch Weekends. As the mountains start to open and the snow starts to fall, we're going to be spending a lot more time indoors with a lot of people nearby. So up next, we've got a little bit of advice on how to avoid getting sick this upcoming cold and flu season. Welcome back to the show. As things are starting to get cooler and we're moving into the winter season, we're also moving into respiratory illness season. With colds, flus, COVID, and even RSV around, it can be a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what those sniffles that we have are. And joining us now is Dr. David M. Persing of Cepheid. He's their Chief Science and Technology Officer and an expert in diagnostic tests. Welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
So it's my understanding that it can be a big deal to get a little bit more information on what exactly we're coming down with, especially early in that symptom onset. And a lot of those rapid response tests can really give us that little bit of extra information. So tell us a little bit about just kind of the basics there on what we should be looking for and how those tests can help.
Sure. Well, we've all gotten used to the idea of using a rapid antigen test for COVID testing. These tests can be run at home, but they only detect one thing, and that's COVID. And yet we know that for the upcoming season, we're likely to see a lot more viruses in circulation that can produce very similar symptoms. And so we require tests to really distinguish between them because the symptoms are overlapping to a significant extent. We've also learned that the antigen tests, based on recent publications, appear to be getting less reliable for the new COVID variants, the Omicron variant in particular. And so we need to be using more sensitive tests, especially early in the course of infection, in order to identify what the cause is and whether there's an appropriate antiviral therapy or management strategy that we need to bring in depending on the cause.
Well, and especially since, at least it's my understanding anyway, that a lot of these diseases or illnesses, when they first start off, the symptoms can be almost identical, just a little bit of a sore throat, a little bit of a cough, a little bit of sniffles. But the earlier we have that awareness of what exactly we're dealing with, the more we can get ahead on our treatments. So tell us a little bit more about how these tests have been changing and what we can do to kind of make up for that deficiency you mentioned in the lack of sensitivity in some of those COVID tests.
Right. So The world used rapid antigen tests really predominantly prior to the COVID pandemic as the main means of diagnosing these infections. And what we saw really with the COVID pandemic was the evolution toward more sensitive methods that can use PCR, polymerase chain reaction, to very sensitively detect the viral genomes of these viruses. And these tests are a lot more sensitive than the antigen tests, especially now with the new variants on the scene. And this allows us to detect the cases earlier, and earlier detection is important from the standpoint of earlier treatment. The antivirals that are out there for COVID and for flu are more effective when they're given early in the course of infection, and more likely to block downstream complications from happening with these infections.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And so, as a layman, how would I tell the difference between an antigen test and a PCR test? Would those be like next to each other in the aisle when I go to pick up a COVID test or something from the pharmacy, or would that be something that I'd have to get specifically from a doctor?
Yeah, the nucleic acid tests are tests that you would need to have run in a clinic. You can't buy them off the shelf. So they're really designed to be run in a doctor's office or in a hospital lab or a satellite lab. So these tests are more sophisticated and more sensitive. They need to be run by healthcare personnel in a practice environment. But increasingly, because of COVID, we've seen a lot more capacity, a lot more sites offering nucleic acid testing because of its sensitivity advantages.
So if I was starting to experience some of these early symptoms, but I wasn't quite to the point where I was really debilitatingly ill, but I was starting to get a little bit of a cough, a little bit of sniffles, what would you recommend my first steps would be?
I would recommend a sensitive PCR-based technology, especially focusing on the big four, which is COVID, flu A, flu B, and RSV. These are the treatable viral infections to be able to bring in sort of a test and treat idea. And this allows a rapid decision making about which antiviral to select off the list. And that's really the best time to be able to take advantage of this more sensitive technology is early in the course of the infection.
So you would recommend that at the first onset of symptoms, really just heading into your doctor and asking for one of those tests just to make sure that you were aware what was going on?
That's right, because early in the course of infection, the antigen tests are less reliable, so a negative result is less trustworthy. So having a more sensitive test early on in the course of presentation is very important because of the sensitivity advantage.
That totally makes sense. And so, like, would that be something that we would go to our primary care physician for, or could we get that at any one of the, like, COVID testing sites that we see scattered around our communities these days?
They're more likely to be found in doctors' offices, clinics, and really not within pharmacies or within within sources for COVID antigen tests.
Makes sense. And so how does Cepheid and your work help to boost the effectiveness of these tests? And how are you guys helping to improve treatment and diagnosis?
Yeah, so I mean, the first step in any treatment is to make the right diagnosis. And to make the right diagnosis, you have to design a test to be ready for genetic variants. We saw the Delta wave with COVID. We saw more recently the Omicron wave. These are genetic variants of the virus, and our tests have to be ready to accommodate the genetic changes and still be able to detect the viruses under those conditions. We've seen now 3 new genetic variants of flu A across the world, which could affect test performance. So using a test that's sort of variant ready and designed to be ready for future genetic variation is an important consideration in test selection.
Well, and one last question for you before I let you go. If I've made it to my doctor's office, are there any specific questions that you would recommend asking when I'm pursuing one of these tests?
I think, especially if you've already tested negative for COVID, it would be important to ask about testing for other viruses and also retesting with a more sensitive COVID test because of the sensitivity gaps that currently exist with the available antigen tests.
I totally understand. So is there anywhere where we could go to learn a little bit more about your work or Cepheid?
Sure, you can go to the cepheid.com website, the educational section, Knowing More Matters, and also to the CDC website, which is very informative about what's circulating in the area that you might need to be concerned about.
Awesome. Well, Dr. David Persing, thank you so much for joining us and giving us all of this super valuable information about how to make sure that we're getting ahead of treatment when we're starting to come down with something a little bit. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be right back with a little bit more show right after this. Welcome back to the show. Andre Ward is an Olympic gold medal boxer and 5-time world champion, and he's got an upcoming film called Killing the Image that shares a lot about his truly inspiring story. Let's take a look.
I'm excited because I have got quite the impressive individual joining me here today. We've got 5-time undefeated world champion Andre Ward in boxing joining us to talk all about his new memoir. Andre, how are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be on with you guys.
So you've got a gorgeous new book, with complete with this great portrait of you. Now, you walked away from boxing, and your memoir talks all about that. So tell me a little bit about you and your story, and we'll just kind of dive into it.
Yeah, the goal for this book was for it to always be for everyone. When you're pitching a book like this, the thing that a lot of people hang on to is that it's a boxing book, a boxing book, a boxing book. And I was like, no, it's not a boxing book. It's not a sports book. It's really a human interest story that has a lot in there. I'm dealing with, identity issues, being biracial and having to overcome that and finding my place there, overcoming addiction in my family and then personally, alcoholism. And then talking about just my origin and my love for this sport called boxing and my rise and the ups and downs that come with that, being a teenage parent with my wife, Tiffany. Like, it's a lot of things in there that whether you are just a regular person or an athlete or somebody in between, like, you can pull something from this book. And, I put my heart and soul into it. And I know this book is for somebody out there.
Well, just listening to you talk, it's incredible. So, what made you decide you wanted to walk away from boxing? What was it about the sport? You according to the book, you didn't look back. So talk to me all about that.
Well, it was a long time coming. As a young man in the sport, I've always sort of been, beyond my years, so to speak. So when I was young, I didn't just watch the boxing part. I would always kind of study the fighters and be like, well, man, they came from nothing. And then they had this arc and then they got everything and then they crashed and burned. And I would ask my godfather and coach, Burgess, why did this happen? And he was like, well, babe, it's just always been this way. Sometimes guys aren't taught or, their identity's wrapped up in this and they just can't walk away. And I just knew that I don't want that to be me. And even before I knew what it truly meant, I knew I wanted to walk away on top. And I would study guys like my pastor, Napoleon Kaufman, who left professional football after 6 years abruptly, George Foreman, who had a couple retirements, but he left early and then took a 10-year hiatus, Jim Brown, Barry Sanders. I studied those guys. And I was like, I want to do that. It was a lot harder than I expected when it was time to do it, but I just didn't want to be a fighter that was getting pushed out of the sport and just be physically broke up and beat up. My family deserved the best of me. I gave it my all for as long as I could, but you got to know when it's time.
Oh, I love that. Now, in regard to what you've overcome personally, and obviously you talk about this in the memoir here, do you see, being part of the professional boxing arena, do you see a lot of guys who are struggling with addiction or, the pressures and, making sure that they're always winners? And how did you personally deal with that?
You do see that. and especially with the alcohol, because it's normalized, and it's a suppressor, but it's only a suppressor of pressure or responsibilities for a period of time, and then you wake up and you got to deal with that stuff. Fortunately for me, fortunately and unfortunately, I had to struggle with, alcoholism and experimenting with drugs, but I did it sort of before my professional career kicked off. I don't know what would have happened. It wouldn't have been good though if I was still struggling with those things while trying to pursue a professional boxing career. My last drink was, November 2004. That was right after my gold medal and right before my professional career kicked off in December of 2004. So I'm personally just grateful that God was able to take the taste of those things and the desires for those things away from me before that career kicked off. But I also have empathy for guys that I see struggling with that because, I have a saying that says winning covers a multitude of sins. When you're in the winner's circle, people aren't going to really bother you about your vices or your issues. It's only when you start losing and you're not that same person that people have something to say about it. I try to talk to guys even while they're in the winner's circle and let them know, man, there is a better way.
That is so true. Winning covers a multitude of sins. You've got people that are doing things and they're doing it well, and nobody wants to say anything and rock the boat per se. So talk to me a little bit now. You stepped away from boxing. What are you doing? How are you impacting lives? Let's talk all about that.
Well, I'm a youth pastor now. I had been in ministry even before my career was over, but I'm a minister now along with my wife, and we are youth pastors. So serving, going around the country, spreading the word of God, I believe is my true calling. I feel like I'll always be in, sort of the business sector, the business space. I love business, so I don't think that's anything that will ever go away. And just really just enjoying life and enjoying my family. I retired in 2017. And I really haven't stopped moving. I shot the Creed movie. I worked for HBO before they went out of business commentating, then ESPN for many years, and then did a documentary and now a book. I'm trying to take the rest of the year to just kind of exhale, even though I got to promote this book and push this book like we're doing now and get the word out. But just trying to exhale a little bit and then get things, revved up again for next year. But I'm always going to be active. It's important for a professional athlete to take that drive and that sort of that focus that they've always had and just redirect it from the sport to something else. And these are some of the things that I'm involved in right now.
Well, I love the book, Killing the Image, and then on the back of it, What If I Die? That's definitely catchy and draws the audience in. Now, tell us where we can find your book. It releases on November 14th, so tell me all of the details.
Well, if you're on social media, you can go to my social media page, Andre SOG Ward. Click the link in bio to take you right to the landing page, explain everything you need to know about the book, and give you an opportunity to pre-order. But the book officially drops November 14th, and the book is really available anywhere where books are sold. Amazon, just anywhere you can find this book. It's not hard to find. Killing the Image. This is not a sports book. This is not a boxing book. This is a book about life. And the goal for this book is not just to inspire, but to hopefully people take the inspiration and get up and go do something and overcome something. Because if I can do it, you can do it as well.
Andre, we appreciate you. And you can also get this on audiobook. Are you the guy narrating it?
I am. I did it. It's me. Yes.
And that's an accomplishment in itself as well. So I'm excited. I'm definitely going to be downloading the book. And just to hear you tell your story directly is going to be awesome. So thank you for all that you're doing. Best of luck to you in this release and all of the multitude of things that you're also doing outside of the book. We appreciate you sharing your story. Thanks for chatting with us this morning.
Thank you so much. Appreciate my time with you.
Absolutely.
My name's Devon, and I come from a line of pop artists that can be traced all the way back to Andy Warhol. I'm the guy that's kind of carrying the torch from that tradition into the 21st century. What inspires me is nostalgia. And just remembering anything from the past makes us feel good, warms our soul. And so I want to leverage familiarity with people. The artwork that I'm doing today is very similar to the way pop art started. I still fundamentally work in the in the principles of, sourcing my content from pop culture. So there's photographs and there's comics and there's still, advertising and mass media, that kind of a thing. But what I do is I add a few more layers than they did. As a result of being maybe 60 years on, there's a lot of things that have happened between now and then. And so I feel like I want to capture that too. And so I represent the time gap in different layers in my artwork, almost in the way that you would see layers in geology. Because there's different seasons and years that have passed. And so you can see little relics of the past. There's a lot of layers in our own psychology that I'm capturing as well. I'm trying to take a flashlight, if you will, and poke it through a tip of an iceberg. And let's call that pop culture. The landscape of pop culture is where I start with a little flashlight and illuminate some of the psychological layers below. I try to explore what it is about pop culture that is captivating our attention in the first place. There's this thing called the collective unconscious, so many people can relate to a lot of these things, and yet each of these people come away with maybe a little bit different interpretation, which is what I call the personal unconscious. So I put little story elements in there, and I'm always surprised at what other people take away as the meaning from it. Most songs and literature and art all kind of have this thread, in general, the hero's journey. A lot of these things bring comfort just in general to see because they've grown up with it or loved it, or they aspire to be that person, which is really what the hero's journey is about. Is really, we want to be the hero of our own lives. I want to be the hero in my story, don't you? And so if someone is inspired, I certainly am inspired in working with all of these different stories in this content. And if at the end of the day you're inspired by it, that's my goal, is the inspiration behind it. And I'm trying to make it fun. It's like, I love switching it up. Some people think, oh, this is fresh and new. And then I'm like, but it isn't. And it is at the same time. It's like this, I'm still working in this tradition of artists from the past, and yet I'm putting a modern twist on it. But really, I'm just leveraging the past. And maybe through my body of work, you can sort of see, a wider scope of the whole thing. But really, the core is this hero's journey.
This weather report is brought to you by Sun and Ski Sports, your new mountain sports headquarters.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Wasatch Weekends here on Monday. I'm your host, Ben Roof. I hope you've enjoyed all of our episodes this weekend, and if you've missed any of them, you can always catch our archives on parkcity.tv. Until then, I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next Friday here on Wasatch Weekends.